Just one of the most insane acts of cruelty one could ever begin to imagine. And it's not the first time I dove into the horrific story pointing the accusing finger at one Delphine LaLaurie. She's noted as a prominent socialite of the early 1800s, one of whom owned black slaves. And yeah, she was brutal, she tortured them, she despised them, but that's stuff she did which sits at the very tippy top of the pile. Oh no, she went beyond the threshold of torture. So brutal she was to her slaves, where she found herself fleeing America. You might say, why would fellow slave owners detest her cruel acts of punishment? It was what slave owners did during that time, so why all of the fuss? Well, when you get a firm layout of what she did, will turn your stomach a few times around like it did the Slavey owners who discovered her dark secret. Her story indirectly ties into some of the torture films of the 20th century. And as well as another horror story that took Wisconsin by storm. We got quite a bit to cover, so let's dive into this head first. So what's scarier than a monster under the bed? A human mind that no longer sees other humans as people. And that's the case with Delphine LaLaurie, who easily takes the top 1834 Psycho Award. Yeah, it's shinier than your typical silver-coated Tony Award. LaLaurie's mind was a fractured mess, like shattered glass all over the floor. Because the psychological aspect behind hers and another story feels like they came straight out of a never-ending nightmare. Her story quietly shaped some of the most iconic horror films ever made. We're talking about a 19th-century New Orleans socialite who allegedly turned her attic into a torture chamber. It's eerily similar to the story about a quiet Wisconsin farmer whose House of Horrors inspired cult characters like Leatherface, Norman Bates, and Buffalo Bill. No two of these mentioned are actual movie characters, that both hid terrifying secrets. Leatherface was this disfigured freak of nature, and the town folk worked to keep him invisible. Yes, Leatherface was often referred to as Bubba Sawyer, or Jedediah Sawyer, who is explicitly depicted as a cannibalistic serial killer in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. He, along with his deranged family, hunts, kills, and butchers humans to sell or eat, often selling the meat at their gas station. It's a different story in the case of Norman Bates, a very enigmatic problematic character in the movie Psycho. He had a fixation for his mother's presence, to which he digs Norma Bates' body up from her grave. He eventually uses embalming, or taxidermy bodily preservation methods, to ward off deterioration of his mother's corpse. Norman went as far as to keep her body propped up sitting in a rocking chair. He would even go as far as to walk past a window within a lit room at night. The effect projected a ladylike silhouette bodily figure. The angle was to give the town folk a false perception that Norma Bates was still alive. In reality she was already long gone. But when it comes down to Delphine LaLaurie's level of insanity, the boundaries between reality and delusion completely dissolve. And the unthinkable becomes a mundane routine. So this terrifying secret that's revealed takes place in 1834 out in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was located in the French Quarter, and it's where Madame Delphine LaLaurie is pictured as an innocent Southern belle. She's wealthy, charming, and known for throwing lavish parties in her mansion at what's now 1140 Royal Street. But behind the silk gowns and crystal chandeliers within the mansion, there was something off about her. Then one day, a fire breaks out at her residence, and firefighters along with her neighbors come rushing in. What they found in her attic still shocks historians today. And that was enslaved people, men, women, even children. They were chained to walls, mutilated, some strapped to makeshift operating tables. She had bodies in cages, and evidence of extreme, sadistic abuse that went far beyond the already brutal reality of slavery at that time. Newspapers at the time called her a demon in the shape of a woman. An angry mob destroyed the mansion. But LaLaurie managed to escape. She fled to France, and was never brought to justice, so basically she took what she did to the grave. Over the decades, the story grew. Local lore added layers, grotesque medical experiments, body parts in buckets, even whispers of cannibalism. American Horror Story, the movie, is where director Ryan Murphy leaned all the way in actress Kathy Bates's character to play a deliciously evil version of LaLaurie. Historians confirm the documented torture was horrific. The most extreme details were cannibalistic. Full-on mad scientist labs are likely amplified by time, rumor, and the human need to make sense of pure cruelty LaLaurie inflicted on her victims. But why does this story stick in our collective memory like a splinter? Because it shows how someone outwardly refined, socially powerful, and normal can harbor a level of sadism that feels almost inhuman. No diagnosed psychosis here in the clinical sense. This was cruelty enabled by a system that treated people as property. Yet, the mind that could do that, day after day, while smiling at dinner parties? That's its own kind of break from shared humanity. No, let's fast forward to 1957, Plainfield, Wisconsin. And the reason is because of the equally disturbing serial killer who still till this day will never be forgotten of the horrors he committed. This was Ed Gein, who was a resident in the sleepy rural town. His was seen as an oddity, a bachelor farmer everyone kind of knows but nobody really truly knew. When police finally search his farmhouse after a local woman disappears, they walk into a scene that sounds like fiction. Because they discovered human skin used to make chair covers, lampshades, even a woman's suit he would sometimes wear. Or the skulls they found were turned into bowls. Gein turned human organs in jars. He was an infamous graves robber, who liked to preserve body parts. Gein wasn't a prolific serial killer in the modern sense. He was convicted of 2 murders, but what he did with the bodies shattered the town's sense of safety. People who grew up there carried the trauma for decades. Here's where the psychosis angle hits hard. Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found not guilty by reason of insanity. His domineering, ultra-religious mother raised him in near isolation, preaching that the outside world, especially women, was sinful. After she died, something in his mind fractured completely. He heard her voice. So he tried to become her. He blurred the line between life and death, self and other, reality and delusion. Modern experts debate the exact label. Some say true schizophrenia with psychotic features is what he lived with, while others point to severe trauma, grief, and possible personality disorder. But the core is the same. His grip on reality had slipped. He didn't experience other people as fully human anymore. They were raw material for his delusional world. Yeah, that reminds of the ending of that 180s song. It's just an illusion. That's psychosis externalized. And it terrified everyone because Gein looked ordinary. He could have been anyone's weird neighbor. Here's what blows many people's mind. They flip out when learning what inspired movies such as Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which by the way didn't directly copy LaLaurie's real-life terror story. No, its biggest real-life DNA comes from Ed Gein's insane real-life story, where Leatherface-like Gein faces rural isolation, who lives in a house of horrors, wearing the skin masks, and treating humans like meat. Leatherface isn't LaLaurie's ghost per se, but rather he embodies Gein's physical horror made of literal flesh. And what about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho movie? Robert Bloch wrote the novel after reading about Gein. Norman Bates carries the same maternal obsession, the fractured identity, the mother's voice in his head. It's psychological horror instead of chainsaws, and the monster is inside the mind. Even Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs owes a debt to Gein's skin suit. LaLaurie's story wasn't plucked as a direct blueprint, but it lived in the American myth pool, especially in the South. Extreme cruelty hidden behind wealth and politeness. That atmospheric dread seeps into horror storytelling whether creators admit it or not. So whether it's real events, exaggerated legends, or fictional icons, horror doesn't invent the darkness. It interprets it. And when the source is a broken human mind, the terror feels too close for comfort. Alright, so let's focus on the psychosis behind all of this mayhem. So what's the real mind blast here? Psychosis isn't just about someone going crazy. It's a profound loss of contact with shared reality, delusions, hallucinations, the inability to see other people as conscious beings with rights and feelings. In LaLaurie's case, it was enabled by a brutal social system. In Jean's, it was trauma, isolation, and untreated mental illness colliding. Both show how the mind can dehumanize others until the level of atrocities feel normal to the perpetrator. That's why these stories haunt us more than any supernatural slasher. They remove the safe distance. The threat isn't a demon or a ghost, it's the quiet unraveling happening behind someone's eyes. The majority of people won't come out and say it, but deep down they like horror because it lets them face fear in a controlled way. But the deepest lesson from Session 26? The scariest monsters aren't invented in Hollywood. They are interpreted from real fractures in the human mind. And the only way we protect ourselves is by staying vigilant about mental health, isolation, and the systems that let cruelty hide in plain sight. So which story bothered you most? Was it LaLaurie's polished cruelty? Or maybe it was Jean's quiet unraveling? And what other real psychological cases should we dissect in future sessions? So if you liked what you saw today about this informative topic matter, then smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe to Mind Blast Mechanics, where we dive deep into the observations that matter. Also throw out a comment if you have a question that needs to get answered. Don't miss our next video, so make sure to tap that bell. Thanks for watching.